All right, AP World, you get some sick notes. Kind of carry us along here in Unit 2. I'll get as much of this. I think we're going to probably end up going for about 20, 25 minutes. So we'll see how many slides we can get or how long my voice lasts. One of the two. Yeah. So we had wrapped up on our first of our networks of exchange with the Silk Roads network and the Mongol connection to all that. So now we move here into section 3, and we're going to be all about the Indian Ocean. Okay, so with A there, the IO, Indian Ocean. All right, just so we're not writing that over and over and over again. If you think it's going to throw you off, then you go ahead and write it out fully in your notes. But this is just so early influences. I don't want you thinking, it's kind of like we talked about with the Silk Roads. I mean, there had been a Silk Road network before we get to Unit 2, and it's going to be the same idea with the Indian Ocean. This isn't something that is brand new, so we can talk about that concept of continuity again with the Indian Ocean. These are, some of these networks are going to become far more complex. We may be able to talk about that there's a big bump in trade, when we get into our time period here, but there's evidence. I mean, there's trade that goes all the way back to, 200 BCE. It really, we are looking at an example of continuity here, just so that we know that it isn't anything that is brand new. We'd have merchants who already were, traveling out from the Middle East to South Asia, to Southeast Asia, and all of it, primarily trade goods. They're seeking different trade goods, and they're offering trade goods of their own. So we have all of that. A lot of this will center around, again, the Islamic world, and really it's going to be considered to be, when I talk about hotspot, like an economic hotspot is really where we want to be focused here. They're going to play a central role to a lot of this, but then we're also going to see included in the Indian Ocean trade along with them. As I just mentioned, you're going to also have South Asia, Southeast Asia, Africa will be involved in the in the Indian Ocean trade, and you'll get a little bit of some contact also coming from China up there as well. Okay, but we do look at kind of like ground zero for a fair amount of this being. The Islamic world, things coming out, as far as trade goods and things coming back in, just so we have that kind of in our kind of collection of facts here. All right. So some of the reasons why we see this big expansion in trade during our time period, which I guess whether we want to, we can call this the continuity and the change, because we are going to see like I mentioned before. More complexity and more usage of the trade routes during this time period. Okay, so one of them is going to be a topic we've already talked about before, and that is the fairly aggressive spread of the Islamic faith, and the idea that we've got, if we're going back to the Abbasid dynasty, if we're going back to kind of the time frame, before the Mongols come in. And then this will continue after the fall, after the fall of the Abbasid dynasty. We talked about in class, the Mongols, their stay in the Middle East was not extended. And as soon as they withdrew from the Middle East, from Southwest Asia, then a lot of this, might have taken a little bit of a step back during that time frame, but then we'll get back going again. And so, back on this track of kind of spreading the faith, spreading culture, and spreading business, which, again, we see these kind of walking hand in hand. Calicut that is mentioned there, this is a major port city that is on the west coast of India. And it will become an early major trading post and kind of another, I guess you could call kind of a hot spot. You see it on the map up here. It's right there. Okay. So pretty nicely located there to take on a lot of that trade coming from, the Middle East, and then positioned as well for a lot of that trade coming from Eastern Africa. And then, sail out and boom, you're off to Asia. The rest of it there, Southeast and East Asia. And so it really is well located. Its primary trade good that comes out of there is are spices. And some of those are spices that are from India, but a lot of it's the spices that are being brought out from Southeast Asia, from the Spice Islands, that kind of an idea. Okay. And let's see, what else do I have here? Demand for products. So when we talk about this, I think you would mention before that there's a certain time frame in history where demand for products, a lot of it is luxury goods. It's going to be the stuff that typically only some of the wealthier people in some of these different cultures or civilizations are going to be able to afford. We're going to begin to see that is going to expand during our time frame here, and we're going to see that that we're going to go a little bit beyond just luxury goods and start getting into, things like, rice and grain that aren't going to be considered luxury anymore. It's just like, okay, yeah, these are trade goods that, almost anyone will be able to afford and have access to. And so we will definitely see that going on. Here, let me just pop down here. There we go. Talk about some of the stuff that's kind of coming out of India, and there we can talk about. Trying to think here. Oh, okay, here we go. Sorry, brain is full of cold medicine. Obviously, from the photograph there, you can see that is cotton, and so that will be something. Tan leather goods from India will also be high demand. And again, over time, not really considered so much to be just, just a luxury good. You'll also see linens and carpets coming from India. Natural dyes like indigo will become very, very popular and in demand. So some of that kind of thing going on. Okay. All right. And then flipping it down to Malaysia and Indonesia, okay, which is getting us down into the Spice Islands. Some of and that's my little picture there. I know it's kind of small, but some spices there for you. We can look at like nutmeg, cinnamon, clove. I think you've even looked at, I think that little glue in that we had a few examples of that as well. And I think your Silk Roads map kind of give you a little bit of a picture, because there's always a little bit of crossover with some of that. But those are some of the spices that are coming from that part of the world. From Africa, we've talked about before, so I don't have to spend a whole ton of time. But gold and ivory continue. There's also some really exotic woods that come out of parts of Africa, and iron. We talked about iron being available, mined out of Africa, and also in demand. And then there's also people. We'll throw that into the mix that Africa early on here in these trade networks, we're going to see slavery coming from Africa and heading into parts of the Indian Ocean exchange. Again, this is before we get to anything going on transatlantic, so let's just leave that out of the picture for now and just focus on what's going on here. All right. For China, porcelain will be a big in demand. It's where we get that whole idea. If you've ever heard, going over to Grandma and Grandpa's for Thanksgiving or something, it's like, we're bringing out the fine china, that kind of thing. That's kind of what the reference is to. But gunpowder, tea will be a big demand item coming from China as well. And then, the good old rice, champa rice and other varieties of rice as well. All right. Let's see. And then Southwest Asia from the Middle East. So if we're looking at figs and dates, that's what I've got there on the picture. Horses also will be a demand item coming from the Middle East, Arabian horses, that kind of thing. And so, whether they're being used for, human transport or for agricultural purposes, those kinds of things. All right. And let's see, anything else? I think, no, I'm going to move it along here. All right, that is the number 3 hiding in that picture there. And so let's focus in on what I was just talking about here, and that is the slave trade that developed in the Indian Ocean region. Um, oops, there we go. There we go. All right. So what was referred to as the Swahili coast, okay, the kind of eastern coastal areas of Africa, is where we're going to see a lot of the slave trade that will, serve the Indian Ocean region. And pop down here. There we go. And connecting into what we've learned about already. Again, we talked about, I guess, some more continuities going on here. Is the fact that where a lot of the slaves that are going to end up in this trade network come from warfare that is being conducted between various African kingdoms, African tribes, African empires. And as they war with each other over land, and political control and those sorts of things on the African continent, you're going to find that some of those kingdoms then, taking those prisoners of war and then marching them out to the coast, where there will be this growing number of trade posts that are being built along the coast, and what they even call slave forts, where slaves will then be offered up for sale to foreign shipping that's kind of coming in and moving out. So B is to let you know what the destination is for a number of these slaves. So some of them heading off to just other parts of Africa, that's in the north there. The Middle East, we talked about, even like with the Zond Rebellion, we've kind of already referenced some of this. And then some will also be heading off to parts of Asia. I would say that I'm kind of putting those in order in terms of where you're going to see the most. From North Africa being higher density down to the Middle East, and fewer African slaves making it all the way out to Asia. But at the same time, not to say that there weren't any, there were. And then how they would be used. Many of them are going to be brought to new destinations as forced laborers. I think that's how most people in their minds, when they think of slavery, they just automatically go there. People who are doing tough, difficult, challenging manual labor, and kind of doing some of the grunt work that no one else wants to do. And not being, obviously, as slaves, not being paid for their labor, being kept alive enough to where they can keep working. And so you got that. A lot of them actually do end up as servants, as house help and things like that. I think a lot of times we lose kind of sight of the fact that in many cases there were almost as many slaves being utilized in that regard as forced laborers. And so, many of them who end up, whether it's, helping to run a household, helping as nursemaids, and, helping as, basically what they refer to as domestic help, helping to raise the kids, all that kind of thing. And so, you're going to end up with some that will go that way. And that was kind of still a mix of men and women who would end up being used that way. And then soldiers, in some of the areas that these slaves end up, they are trained as soldiers to fight for the new lands that they have been moved to. Typically, that's just not anyone who's going to end up in a situation like that. There is kind of an idea that you're going to get some privileges in exchange for being able to basically serve your enslavers. And a lot of times there was also the promise of freedom at the end of military service. And so we will see the use of some of these, soldiers who start off as basically, slaves being brought out of the African continent in various parts of the Indian Ocean network. All right. And then connecting back in with what I talked about with those soldiers, it really varied from place to place in terms of, did slaves, were they given any kind of rights? Did they have the opportunity for freedom? I can't really give you just like a general, it's like, oh, yep, they all had this and they all didn't have that. It really, really did vary from place to place. In some parts of the Indian Ocean, slaves were allowed to marry one another, as opposed to, when we think about like North American slavery, technically, legally, most of those in the American colonies were not allowed to. They would kind of do their own unofficial. But in a lot of parts of the Middle East, or excuse me, the Indian Ocean network, they did have those kind of rights. Some of them did have the ability to work themselves to freedom. But again, there's no real, like I said, there's no general rule saying, yeah, they did this, no, they couldn't do that, that sort of a thing. All right. Yes, I am watching the clock. 5 minutes. All right. Let's talk a little bit here about, let's see here. Okay, yeah, we're still kind of on our causes of expanded trade. So here's some improvements when we come to knowledge and technology, all right, or the improvements I'm specifically talking about here. Knowledge and technology, all right. First of all, big one here, what they refer to as the monsoon winds. Let me make sure I don't have that down below. Do I? No. We'll get that back. Okay. The monsoon winds are seasonal winds that change directions in the Indian Ocean region. My map is too tiny up there, but it kind of shows where some of those major wind current areas are. And, as people are spending more and more time sailing the Indian Ocean, they begin to have a better understanding of these monsoon winds, and it gives them the ability, as they gain the knowledge, as they begin to track, when the currents are moving in this direction, and then where on the calendar does it start to shift the other way. They begin to understand how they can use those currents in their favor, when to sail and when not to. And to use, that wind power to help them to get from, east to west, from west to east. And so, you've got that. And that's just one of those things that as people are, just becoming a little bit more, astute at understanding these kinds of these things, and then creating charts that even, show these wind currents and chart when it's the best time to use it and that sort of thing. Yeah, that's going to help. All right. And then for B, Latin sails, these are sails that kind of like the picture you see over here. It's more of the kind of the triangle-shaped sails instead of big square sails. And, through trial and error, sailors learn that this kind of arrangement of sails does a better job of kind of catching the wind and kind of moving you along, okay? Mentioned already before, the invention of the stern rudder, that came up somewhere back there. We might have been talking about that as connected to the Silk Roads, but I think it was, I guess. We were talking about the dhow and the junk, a couple of those ship designs, boat designs coming out of the Middle East and Asia, East Asia, respectively. Both of them make use of that stern rudder. And then the astrolabe, this beautiful little piece of machinery you see over here. This is a Middle Eastern design. Kind of comes out of the Islamic world. And I think that the Chinese, I think this example I have here is from the Islamic world. The Chinese also help along with this as well, and kind of add some improvements to it. But it is a tool that is going to be used for helping to determine direction. It's a navigational tool. All right. And so, combined together, A and B, what the bottom line and give you is the ability to travel longer distances and to travel accurately and be able to, get where you're trying to go and all that kind of business. All right. And let's see. And then, I think this is where I'm going to wrap it up. Another one, I guess, the last of the causes is going to be the growth of these big trade cities, kind of like Calicut that I mentioned to you, and Malacca that I have mentioned here is going to be Another one of these major trade cities. And hold on just a second. I've got to sneeze. Glad I didn't have to subject you to that. Anyhow, Malacca. Its name comes from actually a strait that is in the area of Malaysia. So we're getting down into Southeast Asia again, and major trade center that connected the South China Sea, the Bay of Bengal, and South Asia, and over time became a sultanate, and just again major trade cities that are connected along there that are dealing with, again, trading spices, fabrics and textiles, precious metals, that sort of thing. And so, we can use Malacca and we can use Calicut, both as examples of these trade cities. And then I've underlined their states because, again, Malacca will become actually more of a state than actually just a city. We use Calicut as the city example. All right. Okay, guys, that's right over 20 minutes. That's where I'm going to hit the brakes, and we'll pick it up together in class. All right. Thank you. Bye.